Good morning. My name is Yen Tang. I'm the Director of Outreach for DSGA, and I have the pleasure today of welcoming a great group of folks who work in the public service space who lead with accessibility in mind. It's fitting that today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day because we're going to talk about how all of us in public service can contribute to equal and equitable access to the digital content that we make available on our websites, through social media, through ebook delivery, at self-service kiosks, just about anywhere that Georgians have digital interactions with the government. So I'll begin with introductions and kick off with a question to each of our panel members about how their organization addresses digital accessibility and any governance that in place that enforces or supports that. So I'll start with you, Stacy. Stacy Peace is our state ADA coordinator, and she leads this office. That's part of the Financing and Investment Commission that provides financial and construction management for the state of Georgia properties. So in this capacity, she's responsible for the programs, activities that advance and monitor agency compliance with this ADA statewide. Stacy has a long history of working for the rights of persons living with disabilities, including being a past chair for the Georgia Emergency Preparedness Coalition for Individuals with Disabilities and Older Adults, as well as being an attorney representative for individuals seeking disability benefits from the Social Security Administration. Thanks so much for joining the panel, Stacy. How does the state ADA office address digital accessibility?
Well, one of the things that we do is we look to the federal government for guidance. And for many years, it was kind of a gray area. We didn't have a whole lot of guidance, but we have got some recent guidance that's come out of the federal government regarding website accessibility for state and local government entities. And that is available on the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights website. And it gives some information about what the expectations are. As a state agency or entity, we have the requirement of making sure that all of our program, service, and activities are accessible and to the greatest extent feasible. And so that includes our website activities. So we try our best to make sure that that happens. We also follow the guidelines for WCAG, web content accessibility guidelines. We try to make sure that we mirror those guidelines that are as best as we possibly can. And then another thing that we do is we work very closely with the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation at Georgia Tech. And you'll hear a little bit more about CIDI, as we like to call it for short, as we talk a little bit more. But they are our partners in a project called Access Georgia. And so under that project, we try to make sure that not only are our websites and our web content accessible, but we try to assist other state agencies in making sure that their web content is accessible as well. And so those are some of the ways. Of course, we also partner with GTA. You all are great, and Digital Services Georgia, in helping us stay on track, teaching us some things that we may not know and how we can create a more accessible website and a more accessible web content. So it really kind of takes a village. You can't really do it alone. We also work, with our IT folks here at our agency to make sure that, what we're placing on our website is accessible. And then also, it's also important to bring in the content editors, the folks who are uploading content to your agency website. Your website could be built on an accessible platform like Drupal, but if the folks that are putting content on the website are putting content that's inaccessible, then you're creating a barrier. So you need to make sure that your website content folks are on board and they know what they need to do in order to upload accessible content. So it really is, like I said, it's a village effort. It takes all of us to kind of make sure that we're doing all that we can.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Let me introduce another member of our village. This is Johan Rempel. Johan is a longtime friend to the state, and as Stacy said, in partnership with ADA office especially. Johan is a UX ICT Quality Assurance Manager at the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation at Georgia Tech. He oversees digital accessibility and user experience initiatives, and that includes the Access Georgia project. He has an extensive background and experience in the areas of disabilities and accessibility, and that includes certifications as an assistive technology instructional specialist, and a vision rehabilitation therapist, and in user experience. He's been involved in his role at CIDI with conducting accessibility audits for state websites, as Stacey had mentioned. Johan, thanks for being part of this conversation. Can you talk about how CIDI and Georgia Tech even addresses digital accessibility?
Sure, again, and it's a pleasure to serve on this panel. Um, very much like Stacy mentioned, it does take a village, and it's no different at Georgia Tech. So we are very fortunate at CIDI in that we have subject matter experts throughout the building. So they're just a call away, whether it's deaf and hard of hearing, whether it's low vision and blindness, whether it's mobility challenges, Braille questions. So we do have the fortune of just having a lot of expertise in-house that we can reach out to. So CIDI really tries to, practice what we preach. So what goes out our door, really needs to be accessible. And that can take various forms. We do our own internal training sometimes on even creating accessible documents, for instance. CIDI has deep level knowledge of this area, but we continually have new staff come in. So whether it's CIDI or any other agency, it's really important to keep in mind this isn't a one-off endeavor. It's very much like security, approaching security. Security is an ongoing issue, digital security, and it needs to be updated. It needs to be maintained. Training needs to take place. So really, we try to be as proactive as possible with the initiatives that we're involved with at CIDI, and really model the behavior and the accessibility that we provide to other organizations. Specific to Georgia Tech, I'll give Georgia Tech a lot of credit. They've recently formed a committee called the GT Pact, stands for Georgia Tech Partnerships for Accessible Communications and Technology. So we have the Office of Information Technology on board. We have legal representation within that committee. We have Institute Communications, so our branding, our marketing. So we are really taking an initiative much more broadly, and CIDI has the privilege of serving on that committee and providing feedback. And with a lot of the DEI initiatives, the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, this really complements accessibility well. So I think as a society, we are further ahead than we were even 5 or 10 years ago. We certainly have a long ways to go, but just keeping this on the radar that accessibility is not a one-off. It's a continued effort and a continued training for turnover of staff and newer technology. So broad strokes, those are some of the initiatives that we take over at CIDI and Georgia Tech in general.
Wonderful. Yeah, can't wait to explore a little bit more of those, but I want to introduce our final panel member, who's worked with Johan and has used CIDI services. Elizabeth McKinney is the director of PINES. That's the Public Information Network for Electronic Services. And PINES is part of the Georgia Public Library Service. Elizabeth has been with GPLS for more than 20 years. So was part of the team that developed the Evergreen open source interlibrary service. Evergreen's this lending system that was developed in-house by GPLS and now is in use worldwide by more than 1,500 libraries. It's provided at no cost to Georgia library systems. Elizabeth's a longtime librarian, having worked at the Eskin Biomedical Library at Vanderbilt University Medical Center and at the EPA Region 4 Library, among many other libraries. Thanks so much for joining the panel today, Elizabeth. Could you speak to how GPLS addresses digital accessibility?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. So the Georgia Public Library Service, also known as GPLS, provides multiple services to public libraries across the state. And my unit hosts a statewide software, which you had mentioned, Evergreen. It's the ILS for the majority of public libraries across the state. And the ILS is the inventory management system, or you may identify that more readily as the card catalog and the checkout system for the library. And we serve the entire population of the state, so there's a broad reach for our services. So GPLS excuse me, GLS is a unit of our agency, and that's the Georgia Library Service, and they promote the use of assistive technology and accessible reading materials for those who are blind or whose physical abilities require the use of materials in audio format or in Braille. So with them as a sister unit in our agency, GLS frequently assists and consults us on the accessibility and usability of our card catalog, our website, and other products that we offer. So we have a very innate relationship with the concept of accessibility, but we do need assistance in obtaining and maintaining it. And that's where the state ADA coordinator and CID came to our rescue.
Fantastic. Yeah, this definitely, I think we all have echoed that this is definitely a village, right? That we are all working together in this effort. I wonder if we can now just start off with this broad question of how do we make that accessibility part of our everyday process? As Johan mentioned, this is something you have to keep working at. So how do we make that part of our everyday process and part of our organizational awareness?
Well, I think one thing that's important is to write it into the policies and procedures for the entity or the agency. If it's not in the policy, if it's not in the procedure, then people are going to be less likely to want to follow it. So if it's something that's kind of built from the ground up, then it just becomes part of the culture, and it's that much easier to just make it happen. And that also includes at new employee orientation. You need to talk about accessibility. You need to talk about the importance of it. You can even make it part of the performance evaluation criteria for when an employee does his or her job. Like, are you considering accessibility options? Are you making sure that you're doing what you need to do, that we're following the minutes of ADA? There are other federal laws that talk about accessibility. So it's something that I think has to become within the fabric of the culture of the entity for it to really become something successful. And that means that the leadership from the top all the way down has to support that. So you need that executive leadership buy-in as well in order for it to be something that's going to be successful within the agency. It's so hard when just the frontline folks are the only ones that are trying to make things happen or trying to push things up. It's easier if you push things from the top down. And so I think that when executive leadership buys in and is excited about making sure that the services are accessible to the clients and the customers that they are working with, then it's just that much easier. Also, just may remember that when you purchase things, your procurement department needs to be on board. So you're not purchasing things that's inaccessible. So that means your contracts have to be looked at, which means your legal department needs to be involved to make sure that you've got the right language in there, to make sure that you're purchasing accessible content and products and services and whatnot. So again, a village, it takes, all sorts of pieces for it to make it happen. But I think really writing it into the policies and procedures for each entity is what kind of starts that process, and then you can work from there.
Great. I'm happy to jump in if that's appropriate, Yen.
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Well, I say ditto to everything Stacy just said. She said it much more eloquently than I could. The only thing I would add to that is, and I give Georgia Technology Authority a lot of credit here. I know in the past you've used personas to better understand the end user and what their needs are.
Mm-hmm.
So credit to Georgia Technology Authority for doing that. I would strongly encourage any agency to have some sort of feedback loop so that accessibility can come across as dry and mechanical, but it is anything but. And to have that end user in mind, provide a feedback loop so that someone who is having difficulties accessing content or a site has some way of reporting that, so that it's not an echo chamber for an agency to get no feedback at all. And then it's a reality check of what is accessible and what's not, because you're actually hearing from the actual consumers. But and this is easy to say and more challenging to integrate, but I would strongly recommend the advocacy of people with disabilities in the workforce. I learned so much from colleagues of mine who happen to have disabilities that I'll often go to and ask, does this work for you? Would you change this? So, and I know that's sometimes a long-term approach, and it's easy to say, but even building those relationships up with the disability community, organizations serving people with disabilities, and just making sure that those communities are being served as well, and reaching out to those on a regular basis. So those are just some additional points I would emphasize.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was wondering if, Elizabeth, if you had that sort of user feedback from your library users about how accessible your library content is.
Well, I had a slightly different, I guess, direction with this, because I just wanted to tell you how we achieved a major step forward with accessibility in our agency. And so Evergreen is an open source product that we developed in-house and have released it to be used by libraries around the world. And we developed this with input from the sister agency that I mentioned, GLS. They ran anything we developed, they would run it through all the various screen readers that they had on hand. But then over the years, as we released it to the other libraries around the world, the emphasis on accessibility diminished. And so at our annual conference in 2019, Athar Sharif spoke to us about the many types of disabilities that exist. And he is a website and app developer. And after a car accident left him paralyzed in his late 20s, he realized how horribly inaccessible his whole composite years of work had been for people with disabilities. And so, as I mentioned, he spoke to us about the many types of disabilities, including vision, hearing, spinal cord, head injuries, mobility and physical, cognitive learning, psychological, and invisible. So those were all the things that he talked about. And he spoke of long-term and short-term disabilities. And so many healthy people in the audience began to identify with the concept of a disability when he spoke of the many types of temporary disabilities that might be athletic injuries, pregnancy, recuperating from a surgery, and so on. So he further helped folks identify by talking about age-related vision or hearing loss. And at the end of his talk, he challenged the community, especially the software developers, to consider designing toward all types of possible disabilities. So our agency was responsible for the subsequent conference. So in 2020, I enlisted Johan to be our keynote speaker to build on the previous year's progress. And during the year between conferences, Johan and his team conducted an audit of our software. And his presentation at the conference then reiterated the many types of disabilities and presented the findings of the audit. So, and I will mention that of all the findings, all but 2 or 3 have been remediated as a result. But our community and then the governing board of the community embraced accessibility as a goal and a theme going forward. So that was a major hurdle just to bring our colleagues on board to address it. And since then, we've been able to do some special projects with GLS, then to make more of the Pines material available to the community that they serve. So
wonderful. Okay, cool. Well, along those lines, I think whether you can speak from your professional perspective or what you've experienced as just a Georgian interacting with government services, including library services, what has Georgia done well or done successfully in complying with accessibility standards? Is there anything that comes to mind?
One of the things that I think Georgia does well, and that is a credit to Georgia Technology Authority and to Digital Services Georgia, is that you started and you offer state agencies a accessible website content to start with. Like they can use Drupal, you update the platform on a regular basis so that you're trying to stay on top of whatever new accessibility features may need to be included. And so that's a great start. State agencies can come to GTA and say, hey, we want you to help us with our website. How do we go about doing that? Not only is that a great start, but then you also kind of help carry them along the way after the website is built. So there's ways that you can put in a ticket and say, I need assistance with this. I don't know how to do this. Please walk me through how to do that. There's training opportunities for those content editors and content managers to go to stay on top of how they can stay abreast of what they need to do. And then you partnered with our office with the CIDI for the Access Georgia project, which is another way that we reach out to state entities and are making sure that Georgia is staying on top of accessibility. So I think that Georgia does a lot of things right. There's always room for improvement, but we have a great start, and we have a great, we've been doing things for a while now in a proactive kind of a stance. We also have Site Improve, which helps us kind of stay on top of, some things are happening accessibility-wise. So I think there's a lot of really good things that Georgia does. And I think Johan will probably speak a little bit more about that as well, because he can talk about the award that was won. He knows a little bit more detail about that. But Johan, I'll mute and let you to add to what I just said.
Sure. Well said, Stacy. So the conference that took place May 3rd, 4th, and 5th, the ADA conference that Stacy, Valerie Peace, and Cheryl Ann Fraser were integral in. They pulled in amazing presenters that not only were statewide, but national. And there are going to be there were over 500 individuals who registered for that. And that is opening up the door, in credit to Stacy and Cheryl, of building not only statewide relationships, but national relationships that we're all in the same boat, right? So those are great learning opportunities and sharing opportunities with other organizations. So a lot of credit to Stacy and Cheryl from the ADA Coordinator's Office for that initiative. It's a tremendous amount of work to put on a 3-day conference like that. And, a lot of great feedback already from that conference. Georgia Technology Authority, I know you all are pushing hard with WCAG 2.1,
That's right,
which is the latest WCAG iteration. That is fantastic. A number of years ago, Georgia Technology Authority was also pushing for level AAA with your color contrast ratios, with your Drupal templates of a 7-to-1 ratio or higher, which is very impressive. So Georgia Technology Authority is going, making strides to go beyond minimum compliance. And, Georgia Technology Authority, to their credit, was recognized by this nationally with the NASCIO Award, the National Association of State CIO Award, specifically for your accessibility initiatives. But once again, it's, I like the way Stacy says it, it takes a village. This isn't the job of one person. Everyone in the organization, any organization, touches digital content on some level. And therefore, everyone across the board has some level of responsibility to ensure that that's accessible, and preferably as it's being created or developed, so that it's not a costly and expensive retrofit. So that education that this team is doing, and others in this state, is really pushing the needle for Georgia toward greater accessibility.
yes.
For me, I want to look for resources that can help us do that, because that's the, like I said, that's the hard part now.
Yeah. Does your does GPLS continue to have accessibility training as an ongoing sort of effort?
We don't have any training. I'm open to that. But I do subscribe to several resources that alert me to issues and
Sure.
things
Awareness, right? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, let me get to this. The flip side then of this question now is that's the good that we're doing. What are some challenges y'all might see that remains for our state?
I was just going to say it's an ongoing educational component to realize this isn't a one-off. So we get a lot of calls, not just by state agencies, but for-profits, federal governments, wanting to pursue greater accessibility. And we have to really emphasize that this is not a one-off. You can have a web accessibility evaluation and make those changes, but if that's not continually monitored, and as Stacy had referred earlier, if the content being uploaded to that site is not being evaluated for accessibility, a year from now, 2-3 years from now, the agency is going to be in the same boat. There's no such thing as 100% accessibility at all times. It doesn't exist, but we do the best we can make is a good faith effort as much as possible. So I think there's an ongoing need for training and awareness. And I will emphasize this too, that this isn't as much of a digital accessibility hurdle as it is an attitudinal and behavioral and understanding hurdle of the needs of people with disabilities. The technical part is actually the easier part. It's keeping this at the forefront. It's executive buy-in as well as buy-in from the frontline workers and everyone in between. So it really is a cultural shift, and the technological aspects of this are actually the easier parts to address. So I would just say the ongoing education and awareness is absolutely essential.
I agree 100% with what Johan just said. Yeah, it's ongoing. It's being proactive. It's cultural awareness. It's becoming the fabric of what you do. It just has to become one of those things that you just think about. You think about budget and all the things that you do when you work for an agency or an organization or company, and so accessibility needs to kind of be thought about that in that same kind of line. You worry about how much is that going to cost, or how is that going to be accessible, or how are we going to make that accessible? It just has to be part of the conversation ongoing in order for it to really stay to work and for it to be something that you maintain in the long run.
Right. Yeah. Organizational awareness. And I think that speaks to Elizabeth's example of understanding, like not even understanding like what we mean when we have, say, just temporary disabilities. And I think that's sort of eye-opening, can be eye-opening for people. So I'd like to, I think we just have enough time to wrap up of what can we do each as public service organizations. What resources have y'all tapped into, or what can you maybe provide if there's requests for helps with accessibility?
I'll go ahead and jump in. So CIDI is certainly willing and able to assist state agencies. We've had a great relationship with Stacey Valerie Peace and her office over the years since 2012. So we communicate weekly, daily, sometimes multiple times a day, regarding resources and availability and working together as a team. So CIDI, as Stacey mentioned, with the Access GA project, it's a relatively small amount of funds, but we do a lot with those funds for state agencies. And then there's also the option for fee for service. So accessibility is not a zero cost initiative. It will cost, especially if it's a newer, more recent initiative. There's going to be a catch-up phase. So just understanding that some of these services, there will need to be a budget available for that. And again, reaching out to disability organizations and building those relationships is going to be essential. I will say there's a lot of great resources on the Access GA website. That's accessga.org. And a lot of our trainings that we've provided, our webinars, are all archived and really address very specific topics like document accessibility, WCAG 2.0, 2.1, the needs of people with disabilities. So that's a free resource for anyone who chooses.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's accessga.org. It's a great resources. Thank you. Thank you, Johan. Stacey or Elizabeth, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, our first and foremost resource is CIDI. Our partnership and just our collaboration has just been so invaluable to our office for the years that we've been working together, like 10 years now. So they are probably our number one resource. We seek them out for guidance. We seek them out for helping to remediate our documents to make sure that they're accessible before we place them on our website, for for brailing documents if needs be. There's a whole host of things that services that CIDI provides, and we try to utilize them to the best of our ability when we can. We also look to GTA and Digital Services Georgia for assistance. I'm still learning. I don't know how to do everything, and I'm the content editor for our office's website. And there are sometimes I run into barriers, but I'm like, I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to do this. And I've sent in a ticket through Digital Services Georgia, and they've been amazing in responding back to me, giving me screenshots step by step. This is how you do X, Y, and Z. So it's another great resource that you have here as if you're a state agency for the state in the state of Georgia. Reach out to Digital Services Georgia for help. They are here to help you, and they have a whole ticketing system that you can submit. They have a whole host of resources on their website. And how do I do this? You can just maybe you can find what you need just by clicking on the link. And then there's other, like I said, the federal government and other entities that we reach out to. We do go to the WCAG website from time to time to see what we might be able to learn from there. So again, the village, lean heavily on my village, and which of course includes, like I said, CIDI and GTA and Digital Services Georgia. That's really how we make it through and how we, try to do our best.
Absolutely. We all need to share in that responsibility. Wonderful. Well, yeah, I think that our big takeaway here today, I think sounds like it's a village, and that we all need to share in this responsibility from top down to all the way to getting content out on our website, that whole workflow. So I want to thank our panel, Elizabeth, Stacy, and Johan, for sharing your experiences and insight. And yes, appreciate your time very much. Thank you.